Welcome to the Blooming League of Original Podcasts.
G'day and welcome to an extra royal edition of Thrash and Treasure, the torture chamber musical comedy podcast that hires a stage crew to remove every piece of shiitake mushroom from our pizza. And speaking of piece of shit, I'm Aaron, and I'm joined as usual by the strange, disheveled American we found wandering the outback on his own. It's Matt the Quizmaster. How's it going?
Hello. Yes, I am back in the outback. I just took a massive road trip, actually. I'm in a film called Heart of the Man. So I was driving all around to Brisbane and Sydney, and now I'm back up here.
Yep. Oh, wonderful. Let me just catch my breath. But anyways, guess what?
What?
We have a royally legendary diva in the studio today. And since Matt is the strange weirdo wandering the outback, we've found ourselves the true queen of the desert. But tap on first as we tap dance across town to toast the top shelf talent whose triumphant theatrical tracks stretch from Toowoomba to Times Square. So this time the rum's on us as we drink to this sweet talking son of a showbiz fam who wasn't a poor student nor a hard god. He's a dancing dynamite dancing man who entered the family business and spoiled us with a once-in-a-lifetime singular voyage which took the odd couple of performances, well, 4 on the floor to be exact, to help this Helpman winner to lift off live in front of our very eyes. So if you and the knight and the house wine can please use your inner voices on this happy and holy occasion as we throw a huge local g'day and sign our name on the drawing board for this phenomenal actor, singer, writer, producer, and favorite legend of King O'Malley's, who's won so many awards, you could call it the Glass Menagerie. Because even the Owl and the Pussycat went to see You Beauty and the Beasts, such as Butterflies of Bill Baker, Angry Penguins, Equus, The Cocky of Bunbury, The Great Bogadoon, Mongrels, plus Goldilocks, and the Four Bears. Oh, greedy bitch. And with over 100 titles on this choir boy's resume, it'll definitely be a long day's journey in tonight. So merrily we roll along before a funny thing happens on the way into the woods on our travels with my aunt, plus Dracula, Amelie, the Man of La Mancha, the Venetian twins, Henry Ive, the Hunchback of Notre Dame, doctors and nurses, and Mac and Mabel and Madonna and Child, and those dirty, rotten scoundrel witches of Eastwick, the sisters Rosenvig, who on the 12th night lit their fantastics like a torch song trilogy. So it's noises off as we make much ado about everything in this comedy of errors, ERAS, such as his TV criminal error in Elementary, Homicide, Murder Call, Rafferty's Rules. So rush to the GP before my heart rate becomes a death trap and help us to Charlie's Welcome to Our Torture Factory, to Matt's former producer's co-star, whose fame follies are enough to turn your voice falsettos. So let's escape the blustery month of May and hitch a ride on Pavlova Queen on the desert, Priscilla Queen of the desert, wearing our finest Texas Chainsaw mascara for the one and only Mr. Tony Sheldon. Holy guacamole, you are on my show. Holy shit.
Aaron, that intro was longer than my entire career.
No, it wasn't. You just mentioned shows before that I didn't even know you were in because I had too many to work through.
I love the fact that you corrected yourself on Pavlova, Queen of Desserts, and went, oh, that's obviously wrong. But I did write a show at the Tilbury called Pavlova, Queen of Desserts. So you actually were right.
Well, there you go.
Hello, Matt. How are you, sweetheart?
Very good. How are you?
Good. Lovely to see your face.
Oh, gosh, the Tilbury. Wow, that's taking us back. Woo.
The producers.
I know. That was such a great time in our lives, or in my life anyway. I hope it was a good time in yours.
Well, and then you've gone on to play Max Bialystock, of course, since then.
I did in Brisbane. For Altitude Theatre. And James Lee played Roger Debris, and it was fantastic. We had a great time.
How wonderful. That's great news.
Thank you, Tony. Thanks.
And now you're a co-host on this show. How far we fall.
Oh.
Anyway, so thank you so much. I am truly so thrilled to have you join us. And for our international listeners, Tony's family is a pioneering family of Australian entertainment, from vaudeville days and television, radio, theatre, everything you guys have conquered across your family. Your beautiful mum, Tony Lamond, obviously, and your aunt, Helen Reddy. I am woman, hear me roar. So it was just Mother's Day. So yeah, did you spoil your mum rotten this year?
Look, we've never really done Mother's Day because I was able to convince her at a very young age that it was a disgusting commercial holiday created by corporates, which got me off the hook of having to buy her flowers and things, when I had no money as a young child. Yes, I'm pretty much off the hook with Mother's Day. Now, birthdays and Christmas are the big celebratory days with Mum, and of course she's just turned 92.
Amazing.
So I know, it is amazing. Nobody in our family has lived this long. We usually all hop off the mortal coil quite young in our mob. But yes, 92. She doesn't know what's hit her.
My dad's 92 this year as well. There you go.
Oh, really? Congratulations. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. The hard part is, of course, the memory goes, doesn't it, as the older you get? And the poignant thing is that Mum is forgetting a lot of her career. Fortunately, she wrote 2 autobiographies, which were published. So she sits down and reads them periodically and goes, oh, I didn't know I was in My Fair Lady, or, oh, gosh, Beauty and the Beast, was I in that? It's like every day's a nice surprise for her. But it's a sadness that she doesn't remember the impact that she had on so many people as a beloved performer on television and in the theatre. So I've been able to collate pretty much all of her appearances on YouTube that I could find, and I've downloaded stuff from my own collection onto YouTube. So there's probably, around 80 or 90 clips now that I've got of her, and I occasionally surprise her with them. And it gives her, she says it gives her a real adrenaline rush to see herself perform, because she goes, gosh, I was good, wasn't I? Which is lovely. It's really lovely.
She was great. I will write her an introduction right now. I will send it to you.
Oh, how fabulous.
You don't have to perform it like that, but at least you'll have that.
I wouldn't be able to do it justice like you do it.
No, I don't recommend it. It's not good for your health, but you'll be surprised how many of our guests are sitting there listening to the introductions going, oh yeah, I was in that. Oh yeah, I remember doing that.
I know.
And it's not until they're hearing it flying by. But funnily enough, talking of parents' birthdays, it was my dad's birthday 2 days ago, and he just turned 84.
Oh, happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
If I tell him that Tony Sheldon said happy birthday,
he will say, who is that?
Well, he watches only sport, but no, he would for certain. But they'd be like, how the hell do you know these people? And anyways, we'll move on. Laramie Project is coming up, which is not so much a question here, but it is sadly very timely with what's going on today.
Yes, you're absolutely right. It's a very hard time for our community at the moment. There seems to be a lot of opposition and hatred rearing its head once again. And it's terrifying that after 25 years, we should still be talking about gay hate and violence against the gay community. So, yes, it's interesting that we haven't started rehearsals yet, but one of the things that the American creatives have asked is that we do it in our own accents.
Good.
So, which sort of threw me when I heard that. And I thought, but we're playing real people in a community in Wyoming. But then I thought, no, it is a universal story. And so probably it will make it more immediate if we are doing it in Australian accent. So that will be interesting when we're all together. That amazing cast of Casey Donovan and Lyndon Watts and Benjamin Law and Nicholas Brown and Cinzia Kenyo, and I hope I haven't left anybody out. And Matthew Shepard's father is coming out to read his courtroom speech that it's the first time he's ever done it outside of America. He's done it once in a production in America. So, and we've got one of the original company, one of the original Laramie people who went and did the interviews is coming out to recreate his role. So it's going to be very exciting.
That's incredible. Greg was actually writing, he was working with Teutonic when I used to work at the coffee shop in New York. So he used to come in and I'd be like, oh, what are you doing? He's like, oh, I just got back from Laramie.
Oh, wow.
We're writing something else for Moises. So tell him I say, hey.
How amazing. I will.
And I just saw a production of it in the States. Community theater, well, interestingly enough, faith-based community theater, so out of a church. And it was an incredible discussion to be had within the faith community and within the wider community in just, sort of the lessons of life and kindness and humanity that come out of a play like that. So good on you.
Exactly. Yes, I'm looking forward to it because I don't do much now. I am retired. And so this sort of fitted in because it's just a one-off, and it felt something I really wanted to be a part of.
Fantastic.
Well, on that note, Matt, you've got a question, which is a bit sillier.
I mean, it is a bit, yeah, we're gonna go from like the serious to the ridiculous. Yeah, and I mean, well, because I've known you for a while, Tony. And in fact, I was in the States when you opened in Priscilla on Broadway.
You were indeed.
And I don't know if you received it, but I sent you a box of chocolates from Priscilla's candy shop in Gardner, Massachusetts.
That rings a bell. Yes, I think I did. I mean, we're going back a while already now. It's it was 13 years since we opened on Broadway, and unbelievably almost 20 years since we did it here. But yes, and I've got photos of when we all had a lunch with your kids, and
That's right.
and everything. Yeah, so that was a lovely day.
So, what is your favorite chocolate in a box of chocolates?
I like nougats and hard centers, caramels and things like that. But I love any sort of chocolate. And the trouble is I'm sugar-free now.
Oh.
So, so it's hard to find sugar-free chocolates that are quite as satisfying. But yes, I'm an addictive personality. I will eat anything or smoke anything or drink anything that is not nailed to the floor. So I had to clean up my act several years ago. Since 2004, I have been squeaky clean in every respect.
Brilliant.
Speaking of metal, Matt, you again.
All right. So, yes. So, as you know, we are talking about thrash metal and musical theater here on Thrash Treasure. And if you could pick your craziest, most over-the-top rock star rider, so you're being performed, you can get that rock star rider, and we want something really outrageous, what would you put in it?
Something really outrageous. I don't know if I can think of anything really outrageous. The closest person I've seen to a rock star was Bert Newton.
Mm-hmm.
He, when we did The Producers, his dressing room was always a fully stocked bar with, chocolates and cheese and biscuits and things. For any visitors who came back, it was like the most glamorous cocktail party that he would entertain people with. So I think I would aspire to that.
The Hague's chocolates he used to bring around to the cast as well.
Exactly. Great chunks of it, great walls of chocolate. But as I said, because I'm sugar-free, I think my rockstar rider would be, I would want sugar-free cakes, sugar-free drinks, sugar-free chocolate all over the dressing room so I could indulge myself without guilt. But do you know what I would really like if I was a rock star?
No.
A car on call. I don't drive. I've never driven. I've spent my life on public transport getting to and from gigs, and it gets real old. And even when I was nominated for the Tony in New York, management was not going to give me a car. And I lived 50 blocks away from the theatre where the awards were. And it was only that the cast got together and made a formal protest to the producers, and they said, you have to get Tony Sheldon a car. They said, this is insane that he's going to turn up for a nomination at the Tony Awards on the subway in his tux. And that was the only reason I got a car that took me there. I had to make my own way home, mind you, but they did spring for a car. So that is my rock star rider. I want a car at my disposal. That's the ultimate in luxury for me.
Awesome. Now, have you had much experience with metal, heavy metal, new metal, glam metal, industrial metal, et al.?
Do you know, I think the only reason you asked me on is because I made a record with Dee Snider.
Ah.
No, it wasn't. I had no bloody clue. Oh my God.
You had no clue?
I had no clue.
Dee Snider did an album called Dee Does Broadway.
Right. Because we covered Dee in the past. That's right. And you're on it.
I'm on it. I do. There's nothing like a day with him.
Unbelievable.
It's me and Will Swenson and Nick Adams, the three of us, the three queens from Priscilla and Dee Snider. We all did nothing like a day. That is my close connection. But I didn't know anything about metal until you told me what we were talking about today. And so I had a listen to the album, and it was a real eye-opener for me because I've always dismissed it a bit and gone, oh, no, I'd be unable to listen to all of that. But once I got over the initial shock, which, I just felt like an idiot.
Oh, no.
Well, I thought I don't understand these lyrics, and I like to think I have a breadth of knowledge about music and that I'm very open-minded. And because I wasn't understanding the lyrics, I thought, oh, you're an idiot. You're not on the wavelength. But this particular group that you're going to discuss today, it's such a mix of styles that they use. And there were echoes of Hawaiian guitars and 60s music and Beach Boys harmonies. And so it was actually really accessible. And the more I listened, the more I got into it and became amused by it, and then ultimately enchanted by it. And so then, of course, I started getting onto chat groups about, people talking about the songs and their interpretations of it. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. There's a lot of religious interpretations, and other people who go, no, it's about drugs. And then they'll go, no. And then finally, after about an hour of this, I found a quote from Mike Patton, one of the songwriters, who actually said, I think too many people think too much about my lyrics. I'm more of a person who works with the sound of a word rather than its meaning. Often I choose words for the rhythm rather than the meaning. And I thought, oh, I'm off the hook. I don't have to know what all this means. I can just go with the visceral feel of it all. So I ended up being a fan of this particular album. I loved it.
Oh, wow.
Fantastic.
There's just a couple of things before we get into Matt's review. Speaking of feeling humiliated and feeling stupid, I'm not unresearched, Tony. I did my research on your career. I promise I spent a lot of time going through all your work.
I know you did.
I have no idea how the hell that got by me.
It's probably not on my CV.
No, well, I try not to read through Wikipedia too much because I know that a lot of it can be wrong and people sort of add things in, and I hate embarrassing myself.
There's a lovely Easter egg I've given you.
Blow my mind and explains why you've said yes.
I'm trying to picture Dee, outside of that sort of, Twisted Sister sort of, like, so is the album art like him, in a very Broadway black and white headshot sort of look, or?
No, it's a picture of him looking like his Twisted Sister persona on the album. But it's very funny because, there's a lot of guest stars on it, but the one he matches best with vocally is Patti LuPone, because they both sound like each other. They're both belting, and they sing Tonight and Somewhere from West Side Story. They do a West Side Story medley, and they're both as strident as each other. It's a wonderful match. It's very interesting.
Just one other thing. I'm so surprised and disappointed in you, Alison Fraser, that you have not forced Tony to listen to Rammstein. What? Goodness me, tisk, tisk, tisk. And I think that was all that was my only notes there. But anyways, Matt, you've reviewed Mr. Bungle's California this week.
I have to.
So I'll let you take the mic, and I'm going to sit down and recover from my brain being blown out of my head because of... Oh my God.
All right, here we go. Mr. Bungle, Mr. Bungle, Mr. Bungle. If you were Lydia Dietz and you wanted to get rid of your parents' guest at a dinner party, you could very well play Mr. Bungle's California and repeat Mr. Bungle, Mr. Bungle, Mr. Bungle like Beetlejuice. Though, just like Beetlejuice, it might have the wrong effect. It might backfire and make them stay. And as the Spotify liner notes explain, Mr. Bungle's sound and approach is a mix of experimental abstract and absurd, influenced by ska, heavy metal, disco, thrash, funk, and avant-garde jazz. And in my opinion, as much as Stitched Up Heart, another band I reviewed in the past, had an LA sound, this is definitely the sound of a San Francisco band. I think ska in general just speaks San Francisco all over for me, which means it sounds like they were doing a lot of psychedelic drugs while working on this album. I was starting with the first track, Sweet Charity. I thought I might be listening to the title sequence of SpongeBob SquarePants, which was quite pleasant and a great departure from the screaming voices Aaron usually makes me listen to when I review the metal album. But the chaos of a thrash or metal album quickly established itself by the second track. I was surprised to learn that lead vocalist Mike Patton was also double dipping as the lead singer for Faith No More, who I would consider to be a much more traditional metal band. And by traditional, I mean just the sound was so consistently metal. But not on this album. Back to this album, California. Are you a fan of the Animaniacs?
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
Animaniacs. Oh, yes. Sorry.
If they made an album, this would be it.
Yes.
And strangely enough, Warner Brothers did produce this album. album. So there you go. It includes all those cartoon special effect sounds as well that pop up in unexpected places throughout the album. A standout song for me would be Retro Vertigo, which has a creepy possessed wind-up doll sort of sound, but lands as a song with a more palatable structure. The singing and storytelling are interesting and exciting. Predictability is very short-lived though, as the album soon moves into the B-52 style beach party vibes, Arabic or even Indian instrumentalization, and even Elvis meets a Nick Cave sort of vibe. This is an album that has a lot to say and tries to say it all at once in every single song. Pink Cigarette offers a respite with mellow vocals after a wild introduction. I suppose I'm realizing that songs on the album that followed Mr. Bungle's version of Convention and Logic appealed to me the most. But that is not to take away from the fun of the rest of the cacophony that makes up the rest of the album. There's a lot for musical theater fans to like here, with songs that seem to reference every musical in the world. I mean, every single musical, from Bye Bye Birdie to The Band's Visit to even Ride the Cyclone, one of Aaron's favorites, and then some more. But by Gollum to the Bionic Vapor, I wanted to pick up a large cartoon hammer and beat myself over the head like Daffy Duck. But what would you expect from a band that took their name from a corny children's educational film regarding bad habits that was part of Pee Wee Herman's HBO special in the early 80s? A compelling, if ultimately confusing album. It grew on me in repeated listenings, but ultimately made me want to smoke a doobie to calm down. Just to calm the F down, Mr. Bungle. And the last track has the metal elements our loyal audiences would come to expect from a Thrash and Treasure album. It's a lot. A lot. I'd say I'd give it 2.5 out of 5 stars, but it's a good one. There's a lot in there.
Yeah, my favorite track was Ars Mariendi, the one with the Indian chant that happens about halfway through it. And I thought I would love to see like a fabulous dance number done to this. I thought this music is really sort of like exciting, and I'd love to see it done by dancers. And then I looked up, I thought, what does Ars Mariendi mean? And it said, it's the art of dying. It's 2 Latin texts dating from 1415 and 1450, offering advice on the protocols and procedures of a good death. And in other words, how to die well according to the Christian precepts of the late Middle Ages. I thought that had nothing to do with the dance number I was envisioning in my head.
Well, Chris Catelli was on as well when I was hosting with Aaron, and we talked about choreographing to the metal album that he listened to. So maybe Chris is someone you can call to live out this fantasy of bringing that song to choreographic life.
I worked with Chris. He was directing a production of a workshop production of Pageant that I was a part of, and there was a very long intro to a song on the day we actually performed in front of an audience, and Chris hadn't given me anything to do, and so I improvised a dance number to this intro. And it wasn't until after the thing finished I thought, I just improvised a dance routine in a Chris Catelli show without asking permission.
Yep.
I thought that's very bold, and also probably rather Australian. I thought I was very bolshy when I worked in New York, and I asked somebody else. I said, "Do Americans do this? Do they just sort of speak up and say,
no.
Oh, I think we should do this?" And they said, "No." So I thought, yes. Oh well, the Aussies are in town now.
That's it. Now, yeah, it's interesting about Ars Moriendi because I thought it meant upended or ass over tit, but it turns out I was right. I literally wrote that joke down, Tony. So when you started giving the meaning, I'm like, no, you're going to ruin my joke. I'm not going to get a laugh, but I still got a laugh out of it. Yes, because that was a written joke. I picked this actually because you had suggested Sweet Charity as the musical, and then there was a whole thing. We've already done Sweet Charity.
I think Mr. Bungle, like I said in the review, it's there's so much in it, and I was like, wow, what? But honestly, like listening to it the second time and even the third, I was like, oh, there's so much more to enjoy than the original, like just cacophony or the onslaught of everything. Yeah, and they really are like they are a very cheeky sort of band, it would seem. I mean, I don't know if you have read about their big feud with Red Hot Chili Peppers and how they did this Halloween show and they dressed up.
Yes, they dressed up as them, and I also read something about that they got a lot of bad reviews for their albums initially, but time has shown them to have been quite influential in terms of metal music, in terms of other bands, and the two of them moved to Australia and now live in Australia.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah.
And also this album, you know, as a lot of good metal albums are of a time period, and this one came out, I think, in 1999, and just the musical influences of that time are so interesting and exciting on this album.
Yeah, I do remember it being released. I think I had heard it at least once at a friend's place. I heard a bit of 50s rock and roll in there. Mike Patton is a genius. I've enjoyed every album of his, Faith No More. And this one, I thought it was crazy. 4 stars. This guy, yeah, it was just so wacky.
It's so interesting in songs like Pink Cigarette that the film noir references, like, you know, to perfume and cognac and lipstick and champagne and Pink Cigarette. And I thought, you know, from song to song, the imagery is very strong and really interesting. And so even though I wasn't grabbed particularly by the music of Pink Cigarette, I was really interested in what he was doing with it, you know.
Yeah, and it's very theatrical. But you, in your review, Matt, you missed an opportunity for a pun, and you should have said Pink Cigarette offers a breather. Not a respite.
A breather or a chance to inhale.
Exactly. See? Oh, goodness gracious. Man.
This is why you're the writer and I'm the, idiot co-host.
I'm the village idiot, technically. You're the quiz master. You're meant to be the smart one.
Oh, that's right. I know.
Even though I'm the one that writes the quizzes.
Well, exactly. Yes.
But yes, if you could give it stars out of 5, Tony, how much would you give it?
I would give it 3 out of 5.
Yeah? Oh, wonderful. Well, there you go. Well, this is probably a good gateway into Rammstein for you. So, Alison, I have done you a favor.
I am primed.
You are. If I can find my it looks like the carnival is over. We can send the clowns out to an ad break. From the producers of Thrash and Treasure, around the world in 80 plays. Starring the adorable Lizzie B and Alfie Parker, and featuring the star of the show, Dolly the dog, they'll take you for a trip around the UK, exploring the rich arts and cultural history, but here is a sneak peek.
Long time no see. Welcome back to the second leg of Around the World in 80 Plays. I'm Alfie Parker, and that's
Lizzie B.
And we're joined as always by our 4-legged friend, Dolly the dog.
Woof woof.
After a 2-month break from brand new episodes, we've boarded the bus for Bradford on the 8th stop of the Sister Act UK and Ireland tour.
Lots of Bradford love.
Lots of Bradford loving. Now, moving on to the tour. This week we've been performing in the Alhambra, as I said, and I believe this is Lizzie's moment to shine, to give us an insight.
Are you going to yawn all the way through it this week?
Yeah, last episode I was yawning a lot. This week, I don't think I'll yawn.
Are you going to interrupt me throughout?
Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe.
Let's see how it goes.
If anything really shocks me and I'm like, whoa, then maybe I'll exclaim.
Oh, I can't wait. Right, so, as Alfie said, we are at the Bradford Alhambra Theatre, and I personally think this is one of the nicest theatres in the UK, which always makes it worth going to Bradford. I'm having a lovely time.
Yeah, that's nice.
But I've had quite a cold experience there before because I've always stayed in hotels, like just bog standard hotels. As you said, walked 30 seconds to work, walked home. So I haven't gone out or done anything like that. But this time I'm having a totally different experience. But talking of the theatre, basically my point was the theatre is so nice. So here's my information taken from good old Wikipedia.
Here we go.
The theatre was built in 1913.
Ooh.
and it was built by the architects Chadwick and Watson of Leeds.
Not to be mistaken with Sherlock Holmes and Watson.
Holmes.
Sherlock Holmes.
This is going to lead on to another thing which Alfie always takes a mick out of me for, because everyone says Sherlock Holmes, but it's got an L in it. So I think it should be Sherlock Holmes.
No, you think it should be Sherlock Holmes.
That's not what I say.
That is what you say.
I say Holmes.
No, you say Holmes. Sherlock Holmes.
Sherlock Holmes.
Sherlock Holmes. Lizzie says Sherlock Holmes.
I don't. I say Sherlock Holmes. I hate you so much.
Well,
oh dear.
Yeah, well, there you are.
Word in. I actually say it right.
Lizzie's totally right. But it's a silent. Yeah, it's a silent L.
So it's not Holmes. It's Holmes.
It's a silent L, isn't it?
No. It's not silent.
Might be. Sherlock Holmes.
Moving swiftly on. It was opened by theatre impresario Francis Laidler. And before you ask...
Right, sorry, carry on.
I actually don't even know why I bother.
No, I'm
Are you
enjoying
taking
it.
any of this in? Who was it opened by?
Francis Laidler.
Right, before you've asked, I haven't researched him any further, but if anyone would like to...
Yeah, who is he then?
A theatre impresario.
They said that about me. Theatre extraordinaire.
Shout out to Jeremy Seckham, my OG theatre extraordinaire. If anyone knows how you become a theatre extraordinaire, please let us know.
I think I'm on track. I think I could.
Of course you are, dear. Right, more facts for you. The large domed turrets are iconic in the Bradford skyline, and they actually are.
Yeah, they are.
So
Fair play.
it's got 1,400 seats.
Is that it?
Oh, sorry.
No, it sucks because it feels so much bigger.
That's what she said.
Yeah, there we are. It does seem a lot big. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
You do. All right, 1,400 seats.
Start behind the Bradford Alhambra.
Call me the Alhambra.
Here's a cool fact. It was the main location, like the set on the film The Dresser, 1903.
They remake that.
Yeah, no, it was a play. It's been a play recently, but the film with what's he called? Mooney, Alfred Mooney. Is that his name? Daddy Warbuck.
Oh, I don't know.
Do a quick Google. Talk amongst yourselves.
Frederick Mooney. Alfred.
Albert Mooney. Albert Mooney. That's him, isn't it?
We're back with Russian Treasure. I'm Aaron. That's our very own Mad Max. Matt,
Huh?
get it? Because you're in the desert.
Oh.
And we're joined by the Tony Sheldon. Now, your aunt is the late and legendary Helen Reddy, and Angie Baby is actually one of my all-time favorite songs. It is.
Yes.
It's moody and it tells a story.
Yes.
Can I write a screenplay based on that song?
I don't hold the rights, so you
God.
have my permission.
Ah, damn it. I tried, but anyways, no. It's a brilliant song. I don't know if you know it, Matt, but listen to it. It is.
I'm sure I've heard. I mean, I've heard all of Helen Reddy's songs.
I feel like it's about drugs, and that's why he gets lost in her world.
Well, he disappears into a radio.
Oh.
Yeah, it's pretty trippy.
Yeah.
I just think it would make a really fun, if not fun, but a real psychedelic movie and an interesting story.
Sounds like a Mr. Bungle song.
Yeah.
Please, anyone, if you're going to buy the rights and make it, please give me 5% at least, because I put that idea out there. All right, I need a break.
Speaking of family members, your auntie Helen Reddy, I have to ask. I mean, I know that we don't really live in the era of home phones anymore. Everyone's on their mobile.
This is outdated.
But if someone, were to call you at home and your mom was there and Tony Taylor was there and I asked for Tony. Is there any confusion?
No, not anymore, because everybody calls me Sheldon or Sheldie.
Yeah.
And everybody calls Tony Taylor, my partner of nearly 45 years. Everybody calls Tony TT or T squared. Friends of my mother call her Lolly.
Oh,
Because back when she was on the Tonight Show on TV, she used to be on the Graham Kennedy Tonight shows, but at one point Noel Ferrier took over the Friday night shows. So Mum used to do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday with Graham, and then she'd do Friday with Noel. Noel nicknamed her Lolly Legs because Mum had very beautiful legs, and so she's been known as Lolly Legs ever since. So instead of Tony, it's Lolly, Sheldie, and TT. It's very easy.
So you could have been an 80s pop band called Tony.
I think there might even have been. It sounds familiar. No, probably Swedish or something, yes.
What we were talking about before, is it Tony Tone or Tony Tone?
do you know that's funny because I when Aaron and I were talking earlier, I called you Sheldie. So yeah, I probably would have just.
Pretty much everybody calls me Sheldie.
I actually no, I'm very formal on the phone. I would have said, hello, Tony, it's Matt Young. And I always like introduce myself with first and last name, even if I'm on the mobile and it comes up and it has people's names. I'm always like, hi, it's Matt Young.
I do that too. I do that too all the time, because I don't expect people to remember me, because often I don't remember people or recognize people. So everywhere I go, when I'm seeing people, even, hello, I'm Tony Sheldon. And I don't care if they go, yes, I know. I think better to be safe than sorry.
I saw Sharon Stone, like when she was, she's still very popular, but at sort of the height of her career, and she walked up to someone on a red carpet and said, oh, hello, I'm Sharon Stone, and they were like, yes, we know. And I was like, oh, that's class. That is class. I love that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Never assume that someone's going to know who you are just because you're in something popular. Just be a human.
yeah, exactly.
Anyways, something segue pun. We're going to move on to the musical now. And Tony and I picked Seesaw, so I'm going to jump right into my review. When Seesaw first rose up on my Spotify, I didn't actually realize the metal album had finished. Cool. But then the cast began singing about seesaws and I caught up. Anyway, my city lit up my speakers with its funky groove, highlighting how New York is like a woman they want to toss into a river. Not cool. Nobody does it like me. Oh, thanks. I hear that a lot. And then the lyrics about being hopeless sink in, and I realize I do hear that a lot. So feeling seen, I saw the next track was in tune. Phew. Spanglish was fun, but I don't really understand half of it, and left me wondering where the titular seesaw was going to come in. Welcome to the Holiday Inn begins. It's perfect for cabaret melody, detailing its lovely Christian lady's side business of being a human seesaw. Jinkies. At least now we know where the seesaw comes in. The Holiday Inn. Talk about ass over tit. Anyways, Seesaw is a fun show about what? I have no clue, and Wikipedia is no help at all. But I can tell it's about New York. There's tap dancing and promiscuous sex. But without context, I'm a little lost in New York. You're a lovable lunatic. Thanks, I hear that a lot. Just as I do many male-driven ballads that sound similar to this. But if I can repeat jokes, I shouldn't complain. But without any idea if the saw is up or down, I can't see past 3.5 stars. Its catchy, fun songs are perhaps less outdated than others.
Well, the significance of Seesaw is actually more of what happened off stage than on. Seesaw was originally a play in the 1950s called Two for the Seesaw, and it was a two-hander. There was one man, one woman, and it was Henry Fonda, the film star, was the man, playing a lawyer from out of town, Omaha, sort of pretty stitched up, waspy type guy, and his affair with a kooky dancer from the Bronx, a Jewish girl named Gittel, who was played by Anne Bancroft in her first starring role on Broadway. And it's in fact what catapulted her to stardom. And they made a film of it with Robert Mitchum and Shirley MacLaine. 20 years later, it was decided, after the success of Sweet Charity, Cy Coleman and Dorothy Fields would do a musical of this show. Well, the problem is, when the musical opened, it had 48 characters in it.
Oh, goodness me.
Yes, and it was originally thought of as maybe a vehicle for Liza Minnelli, but the role went to Lainey Kazan, a fabulous nightclub singer who attracted attention as Barbara Streisand's understudy in Funny Girl.
And she was in The Nanny, I think, for a few episodes.
Yes, she was one of, I think she was the aunt or something like that. Yeah.
Trust the gays to know that one.
Exactly. So Seesaw looked as though it was going to be an absolute disaster out of town because it was sort of overblown and it didn't make much sense. And Lainey wasn't coming across as a dancer, really. She hadn't lost the weight that the producers asked her to lose, and the songs were considered pretty middle ground. So what happened was, rather than close the show out of town, they put out an SOS to Michael Bennett, the choreographer, who was coming into his own after Promises, Promises and Company and Follies. And he came in on the proviso that he have ultimate power. He said, I don't want to answer to anybody. He said, I want complete creative, dictatorial was the word he used, control over this project. And he said, I want to bring in my own people, and everybody, including the composers, has to do exactly what I ask. And he replaced everybody, and he redid the entire show in 6 weeks. He fired 11 of the chorus and he brought in his own people. He fired Lainey Kazan and brought in Michelle Lee. But the thing was that the original company had to keep performing the original version at night while he rehearsed a completely different production during the day. So poor Lainey Kazan had to keep going for another 2.5 weeks, knowing that she was never going to get to New York with this show. Also, one of the people that he brought in was Tommy Tune, who was at that point just a sort of a dancer he'd done the film of The Boyfriend, but he hadn't really done anything. He was an assistant to Michael Bennett. And so Tommy Tune was choreographing a lot of the numbers. He brought in 4 choreographers, in fact, and he was choreographing these 2 numbers on one of the actors in the show. And Michael Bennett said to Tommy Tune, I like you performing these numbers better than the guys doing the show. Let's fire that guy. And Tommy said, but he's a friend of ours. We can't just... He said, well, get rid of him.
Whoa.
And so Tommy Tune had to fire this mutual friend of theirs who apparently ran in tears from the theatre. And Tommy had to write him a letter and have it delivered to the hotel saying, I'm sorry, it's nothing personal. Anyway, it launched Tommy Tune's career as a performer because he went on to win the Tony. Yeah. And he created that song, It's Not Where You Start, It's Where You Finish, which became, a fabulous sort of thing. So the extraordinary thing was he turned the show around from a rather rough sort of In the Heights type gritty piece. He cut all those characters out and he made it a piece. It ended up having 8 principal roles instead of 48 speaking parts. And he made it very chic. There was sort of a chic New York look to it. And he just filled it with dance number after dance number after dance number. So the show came into town pretty much transformed, and it led the way to a chorus line because suddenly everybody realized that Michael Bennett was an auteur, so to speak, and was quite brilliant. And Michael Bennett had made so many changes in the script that nobody would take credit for the book. The book writer left, Michael Stewart.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Michael Bennett put his own name on it. And the credit was written, directed, choreographed by Michael Bennett, even though he hadn't written a word of the show, but nobody else wanted to put their name on it. So that's how Seesaw sort of has gone into history, because it became like the end of an era of musicals, because this was now, Hair, Superstar, those sort of shows were coming in, and Seesaw is a very conventional piece of writing. And then launching the new guard of people like Tommy Tune and Michael Bennett as the new creatives of the Broadway musical. Ta-da! That's my treatise.
Wow.
None of that was on Wikipedia.
I knew some of that. And I read the original New York Times review as well, which you can find online, which was very interesting. And especially talking about, they didn't mention Lainey Kazan, but they did mention Michelle Lee, and just how they couldn't believe that somebody else might have played the part because she was so perfect for the role.
Yeah. Oh, and a little bit of trivia. Guess who starred in the production of Seesaw in Las Vegas? Our own Barry Crocker.
Ah, okay. Did not know that.
Yeah. It's pretty much hidden. It's hard to find any info on it. But Barry with a performer named Liz Torres played Jerry, because it's actually in the script that Jerry is very tall. So it's usually cast with very tall actors, and it's only been done once out here professionally. I think they did it out at the old Marion Street Theatre in Killara out here, and Bunny Gibson and an actor named Paul Maybury, who was 6'6", and Bunny, who was like 4'8". it was okay. I wasn't crazy about the show itself.
Yeah, Neglected Musicals did it as well with Katrina Ortelic and James Miller.
That's right. Yes, which I didn't see.
But having listened to the cast recording, well, first of all, I was like, oh, this is a Michael Bennett show. I didn't know that. I should have known that. I've done a chorus line. And I know Bjork as well, and I knew Bjork was in it.
Name dropping.
I know, right? But the songs are I thought the songs are really quite bland, other than the two sort of standout songs, other than the Nobody Does It Like Me and, the two that sort of became famous.
Yeah.
And I struggled with some of the lyrics as well. I didn't think they were terribly sophisticated for a show that was about New York, especially in that time period.
Yeah. Well, it was the last show Dorothy Fields did, because she was 68. She, in fact, died when they were preparing the tour. She wrote a new song to close Act One for Lucy Arnaz, who was leading the tour. She wrote a new song called The Party's on Me. Then she died. She literally wrote the song and died.
Wow.
So people at the time were pretty impressed that Dorothy was writing sort of some pretty racy lyrics for her age, and but you're quite right.
Yes, definitely. I think that lyric in the first one about New York throws a lady in the lake, I mean that in the pond or whatever, that must have been a reference to Sweet Charity, was it? Isn't that how Sweet Charity begins, where she gets pushed into the water?
Sometimes I'd like to throw her into the river. It could well be. One of the songs, Poor Everybody Else, was actually in Sweet Charity right up to the New York opening. Gwen Verdon sang it towards the end of the second act, just before Where Am I Going? And Gwen Verdon issued Bob Fosse an ultimatum, and Cy Coleman, she said, I can't do these two numbers at the end of the show. I'm exhausted. You choose. She said, I will either do Poor Everybody Else or Where Am I Going? And they chose Where Am I Going for Sweet Charity. And that's Poor Everybody Else turned up in Seesaw. It's literally lifted out of Sweet Charity.
Absolutely no idea. Perhaps I've been affected by the fact that I've just done the musical Ballroom.
Oh!
And Salad Days. So I think that's maybe why I enjoyed this one more than what you may have, Matt, because there was a couple of bland songs for me, but most of them were catchy enough that I enjoyed it.
Well, I think for Cy Coleman, because if because of course, Sweet Charity was mentioned for Mr. Bungle. And for me, Sweet Charity is like song after song after song and of hit after hit after hit, and quite diverse in its sound as well. Whereas this was a bit more homogenous in its orchestration and its sort of execution. But I love the tap dance number where he's tapping.
Yeah, the late great state of New York. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I love that number.
Isn't it fantastic? And also we have to remember that Michael Bennett, when he came in, threw out a lot of the score, and apparently both Dorothy Fields and Cy Coleman were sick with colds at the time, and he asked for 4 new numbers, and they locked themselves in their hotel rooms and wrote 4 numbers in a week, including Welcome to Holiday Inn, Nobody Does It Like Me, You're a Lovable Lunatic. It's pretty extraordinary that these two people threw those numbers together in a week. So it's not a patch on Charity, and even Cy Coleman's other shows, Little Me with Carolyn Lee, I think is a better score. And there's even good things in Wildcat, his first show, which my mum did, and I did. I Love My Wife, the Cy Coleman show, which again has there's nothing fantastic in that either, but that's a very jazzy score. So yeah, he's very hit and miss, I think, the Cy Coleman musicals. And I love On the 20th Century, I've got to say.
I don't know the one.
Well, it's an operetta. It's with Comden and Green, who wrote On the Town, and it was Madeline Kahn played the lead, and it's like an operetta. It's almost classical. It's completely different. His breadth of musical styles is admirable.
Yes, definitely. And actually, and going back to Welcome at Holiday Inn, I mean, that song, I'm surprised I didn't know it, because it's a really fun and racy sort of song, and there's such a history of songs that are similar to it.
Miss Bird,
or even Everybody's Girl from Steel Pier. It's a this sort of classic, sort of cheeky, sort of naughty song where we're singing about something but we're talking about something else. Yeah. So that's a delightful song, actually.
Yeah, I like that. I would want to see it to know what it's all about, but
Well, it's as I said, it's a two-hander. It's the love story between these two people, and he leaves her. He goes back to his wife.
oh, that's good.
And she's a loser. Nobody does it like me. Who thinks she's found Mr. Right, and he says, "I can't do this," and he leaves, and the rest of it is actually all just Atmos. I mean, it's Spanglish is their Puerto Rican next door neighbors, and Ride Out the Storm is a number in a nightclub, and the tap number is something in a tap class. So it's a lot of it's just filler because it's a two-hander. It's an overblown two-hander, and it sort of was doomed to fail from the start.
I just watched the clip of Tommy Tune doing It's Not Where You Start with all the cast in the balloons.
Yeah.
And Bayek has a lovely little thing. And I thought, oh, this is very Priscilla Queen of the Desert when they all come out in the balloons.
There's a very funny story about a guy who got hired midway through the Broadway run, which was only 10 months, to be an understudy, a swing. And he rehearsed the It's Not Where You Start number, and it was very intricate because it's people weaving in and out, and they said it's easy. They said just follow Steve, and Steve is behind Candy, and he went, oh, okay. But of course, when he got on stage, they're all in identical balloon costumes with identical carrot-coloured fright wigs, so he couldn't tell who anybody was. And suddenly there was this poor swing on stage in the middle of with this huge cast, and they all looked identical. He said he had no idea who he was supposed to be following or where he was supposed to be, which I think is a wonderful image.
Oh, I love, as someone who's to this swing, I love that, and that terrifies me. Oh,
Yes.
the same go.
I know, yes.
What carnival ride would you like to see made into a musical, and what musical would you like to ride at a carnival or a theme park?
Well, Carousel's already been made into one.
Yep.
The river caves. I love the river caves.
Yeah.
At like Luna Park, where you're on a boat and you go through. It's like Pirates of the Caribbean. Well, that's been made into a film, hasn't it?
Yep. But not a musical.
Not a musical. I suppose we could do Pirates of the Caribbean. Yeah, I wouldn't want to do the Haunted House or anything because that's like Beetlejuice. And yeah, all right, okay. No, something to do with like a river caves. I love something like that, where you go around a corner and you don't know what's going to be there and all of that. For my musical, I'll stay in the Cy Coleman thing and I'll say Wildcat.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That was Lucille Ball, wasn't it?
It was Lucille Ball. My mum played it out here.
Oh wow.
Yeah. And it was, and Hey Look Me Over comes from that. So I think that would be fun, a fun ride. Wildcat.
That would be the music that would be playing the whole time is Hey, Look Me Over.
Exactly. Yes.
It sounds like a carnival ride, that song, actually.
It does.
The Phantom of the Opera would make a good one because you could a swinging chandelier and just swing back and forth. But I guess it's just a boring ride, isn't it? Anyway. That just didn't go anywhere. Break. Well, it looks like Seesaw has tipped over, so we're going to roll to an ad break. G'day listeners, Aaron here. While you're topping up your coffees, did you know that you can support our show and go on a fantastically scary adventure at the same time? Go to www.thetonistonTales.com/bookstore to grab your copy of The Toniston Tales, a darkly funny Aussie trilogy about a young boy who rescues injured animals in his spare time and the roller coaster ride he's taken on by a literal fish out of water. Written by me, the village idiot of Thrash and Treasure, you'll come to love Toniston Turnbull and the dozens of wacky characters that he meets along the way. And here is a sneak peek. Landing with a thud that echoes throughout the whole cottage, Toniston instantly rips off the manky shoes gifted to him by Milfred and tosses them into the corner behind a blue barrel. Without a second thought, the bully races down the hallway to the backmost room of the house and leaps behind his uncomfortable makeshift hay bed, then waits, and waits, and then waits some more, until finally, what seems like an eternity later, muffled growls start vibrating through the thin walls of Cubpaw's cottage. He tries to control his breathing, but his heart is racing way too fast. Toniston ducks down further. Nothing should be able to see him, but he can't be sure they won't smell him. The gruff growling grows louder. Toniston presses his ear against the cold, chipped, chalky wall. He thinks he can make out phrases like, "Where is it?" and "Give us the merge," though not much else. It's all too mumbled, and he's shaking too much. But it doesn't matter anymore. The front door of the cottage slams open with a harder, louder cracking thud than it ever had before. A dozen or so stomping footsteps enter. The cottage shakes uncontrollably as if it is as terrified as our friend the bully is. Toniston panics. He's trapped in a corner with a slew of sharks on his trail. He makes a sudden rash decision. Ripping aside the thick animal hide curtain, Toniston leaps through the small oval-shaped window head first, landing on a crate filled with hay sitting outside it. Mustering every ounce of manliness he has not to react verbally as he lands with a crunch on the sharp, pin-like hay. It pierces his skin in several places, but thankfully, in his panicked state, the bully becomes numb to the pain. Counting his blessings but not his chickens, Toniston struggles out of the crate by throwing his legs over and levering himself up, causing the coral underneath his feet to snap. He loses balance and tumbles. To describe the pain of tumbling face first down a steep hill of hard, sharp, deadly-shaped coral would require far too many swear words than this author would be allowed to publish, so let's just say it hurt. A lot. With one last somersault, Toniston's legs fly first over the cliff's edge. Crunch. His left hand grabs hold of the outmost jagged knob of coral. The stocky body of the 10-year-old child sways rapidly back and forth like some sort of death-defying pendulum. He gasps for air, or from shock, not even Toniston can tell. All he knows is above him a deadly coral cliff and deadlier sharks. Below him, larger, sharper coral under a sea of giant, sharp spikes of natural metal. His head throbbing and vision too blurred with bright red splotches to be able to see clearly for too long. His face is dripping with blood. It runs down his shirt front, tickling him in the process. But all he can do is swing there. It's moments like these that a boy really needs his mum. Unfortunately, while Toniston's life hangs in the balance, on Earth his life was, dishonestly, being celebrated by all at Gumbaya Primary School after news of the bully's disappearance had spread like wildfire through the tiny town, then onto the music industry before eventually reaching the wider world. Rock music fans, specifically those of Muzzletop, had flocked to the outskirts of Melbourne, leaving wreaths, band posters, and hand-drawn tributes to honour the missing son of their favourite singer. Although none of them knew the boy, many had seen him standing on the side of the stage of the band's concerts alongside Tina. Also, at the time of his disappearance, hundreds of the world's entertainment media lined the streets outside the school and, sadly, outside Tina's house. Wanting any word they could get their greasy hands on, the gossip came in thick and fast as snide, bored neighbours took it upon themselves to speculate and make up stories for their 5 minutes of fame. Inside the house, the phone ringing 10, 15 times a day from nosy TV stations, hounding the poor, terrified mother, there was no escape. And whilst Tina was never polite in her declination, still they persisted. "Call me again and I'll punch you in the nose," she promised. The school's principal, Mr. Patterson, had himself realized how cold and nasty it would look if Toniston Turnbull's former victims didn't at least pretend to mourn his disappearance. And thus, with an added paranoia of becoming a suspect, Mr. Patterson set out to overcompensate with memorials and dedications to the boy who touched all our lives with his love of animals. Mr. Patterson felt satisfied his school's image was intact. The largest memorial from the school came in the form of a service in the gymnasium. With every student, teacher, news reporter, and local police in attendance, Mr. Patterson sought to show the world just how much Toniston had meant to the school. The service would have made the bully puke. From the awful school choir butchering his least favourite songs, to the obnoxious releasing of the white doves, Mr. Patterson may have been satisfied his memorial service paid tribute, but Toniston is far too cynical for that. And yet, whilst hundreds of people sat on the cold plastic seats in the Gumbaya Primary School auditorium, not one person in attendance truly knew Toniston when he was around. But all alone, In her large house, the animals all shunned outside, Tina Turnbull sits with her umpteenth glass of wine, ignoring the umpteenth phone call from friends, fans, and family, but most sad of all, wondering, for the umpteenth time, what she could have said to her only child to have brought the two of them closer together. A now broken photo of Trent Turnbull and an infant Toniston only hours after his birth sits at her feet under the table. Tina simply doesn't care about the million tiny shards of glass cutting up her feet. She just wants her son back. And as if joined at the soul, while dangling from the lavender-coloured dead coral cliff face, somewhere in his head voice, Tina's cries are heard by the boy. His face scrunches up, but then it relaxes. I can do this. Grab your copy of The Toniston Tales from thetonistonTales.com/bookstore today. Hooroo! Anyways, we're back with Thrush and Treasure. I'm Aaron. That's our very own crocodile hunter, Matt Young.
G'day.
And we're joined by a former writer of Home and Away, Tony Sheldon. Is that true? You wrote an episode of Home and Away and 10 of Sons and Daughters.
I was a storyliner and a writer on Sons and Daughters for almost a year.
Yeah.
I was doing I Love My Wife, which folded very unexpectedly and quickly after 3 weeks when we thought we had a year's contract. And the producers of Sons and Daughters were Australian composers, Don Batty and Peter Penny. They knew that I was writing for cabaret shows and that I was a theatre archivist and that I wrote articles about the history of Australian musical theatre and stuff. And they said, do you want to come and write Sons and Daughters? They said it'd be interesting to have a sort of a different style of writer on the show. So because I was suddenly out of work, I said yes. It was very educational, but I had no life because it was a 9-to-5 job in an office where the storylining, where you literally sit around a table with a bunch of other people and you map out for months ahead, the destinies of all your characters and the stories and all of that. Then you're writing episodes that you had mapped out weeks before because you had to synopsize those episodes. Then you take them home and write the scripts. And then every night at 6:00, you're turning on the TV and watching the filmed episodes that you wrote 4 months earlier. So there was no time to do anything else except live Sons and Daughters, and I thought I'd go insane. And I'm a slow writer, so I was up until 3 and 4 in the morning every night finishing the scripts, then getting up at 7 to schlep over to the office. So when Home and Away rolled around a couple of years later, they said, write an episode and see how you feel, and then you can be part of the core writing stuff of this new series. And so I could have been in on the ground floor of Home and Away, but I wrote one episode, which I enjoyed. But by then, my career was back on track. I'd done Torch Song Trilogy. My career was on the upswing again. And I said, thanks, but no thanks. And it's always been one of those, the road you didn't take things, because writing for soap opera is very lucrative, and all the people I was working with have houses on the water and boats, and they've done very well for themselves. And I never made any sort of money out of my career, so I think if I'd been able to bite the bullet, I probably would have been rich but unhappy. I just wasn't of the mindset to be a soap opera writer, but I'm glad I did it. It was really interesting to learn how all that worked.
Maybe that's why everyone's always getting pregnant or shot or killed in an earthquake, because soap writers are unhappy. So they take it out on the characters.
There are so many limits to what you can do with characters when the show just keeps going on endlessly. And there's also the thing of storylines that you think are going to run for 6 months, and suddenly when you're actually writing them, they exhaust themselves in 3 weeks because you've done everything you can with them. So all your plans that you think, oh, this'll go on forever, you suddenly go, oh, it ran out of juice. Or you can hire an actor to play a character that you think is going to work, and suddenly the actor isn't likable or doesn't do with it what you want. So you got to finish that storyline quick and get rid of that actor. There's a lot of variables in writing soaps, and it was very interesting to see how it all worked. And certainly, I mean, I'm a bit of a fan of The Bold and the Beautiful, but Australian soap operas tend to go at 10 times the speed of American soap operas. Something like Bold can keep a love triangle going for 10 years. An Australian soap opera will go, no, we've got to move on. So you chew up a lot more storylines and characters in Australian television than they have the luxury of over there. It's interesting.
What's one thing you fail at that everybody else seems to do perfectly well?
Any of the social graces, I would say. I'm a social cripple. I really am. I've almost never attended any of my own opening night parties. I'm appalling at small talk. I'm a real sort of loner in that regard, and it's very difficult in show business if that's a failing. And it was interesting when I moved to New York. I thought I had to recreate myself because I was there alone, and my partner chose not to come with me. He used to come over every 6 months and hang out for a few weeks and then go back because he didn't want to give up his own career out here. So I very much had to create a whole new social network. I had to learn how to sell myself, which I'd never had to do out here. So I had to get business cards printed, and I had to pick up the phone and ring companies and say, I want to be a part of this benefit, or I want to come and sing in your concert. I had to teach myself how to sell myself. And it was real hard, but it was interesting. I learned how to do it, and I created a whole network of beautiful, brilliant friends over there that was a much bigger network than I had out here because I'd never sort of had to do it out here. So when I had 8 wonderful years in New York where I worked almost constantly, and I'm very proud of myself because I really put myself out there, and then that snowballed and people got to know who I was. And it was wonderful, and I miss it. I do miss it, but I came back because I was frightened of Trump. Trump was coming in. Everybody was anxious and angry around me in New York. All the people I was working with, and I was going on marches, at lunch breaks during rehearsals and doing all of that. And then the offer came to come back and do the 12th anniversary production of Priscilla. Then Mum was getting old, and Tony said to me, "Oh, maybe you should hang around a bit longer." Then I got Charlie and the Chocolate Factory out here, and I wasn't especially happy. And then COVID came.
Yeah.
And suddenly it was like, oh, okay, well, I'm here. And I made the decision to pull the plug on my career because then I couldn't go back to America. My green card expired, and it was suddenly like, okay, now's the time. You're not having as much fun as you were. It's time. The universe is telling you something. So I stopped.
Well, I have 2 very awkward questions then because they're both about New York.
Yeah.
So what was your favorite time of year in New York?
Oh, definitely summer and spring, which I adored. Winter I hated because I was living in Audra McDonald's house with Audra and Will Swenson. Oh, it was wonderful. I had 3 or 4 wonderful years with them as my landlords. I'd pop upstairs and borrow a cup of talent. But of course, I realised that in New York you have to shovel your own sidewalks. It's not like some sort of council comes and does it for you. And so there I was in winter shoveling the sidewalk in front of Will and Audra's house, and I didn't like that very much. But it was interesting because most of the time I was there, I worked outside of New York. I did a lot of stuff. I did 3 shows in California. I did shows in LA at the Armandson. I worked at in San Francisco, in Berkeley. I spent a whole summer in Minneapolis doing My Fair Lady, which was an absolute joy. I wanted to live in Minneapolis. 2 shows out at Goodspeed in Connecticut. I did 2 shows in Houston. I did Camelot and Victor Victoria in Houston. Empire was at La Mirada in California. Where else did I end up going?
You've been everywhere, man.
It was wonderful because unlike in Australia, there are all these fabulous regional theatres, and you're working with brilliant people and all those out-of-town tryouts for shows. And so it was great. I was seeing a lot of America through my work. But I love New York because I could get the subway everywhere. I could walk everywhere. Everything was exciting the whole time. I just loved it. It was one of those dream things that you just never thought would happen, and to be embraced by the community as I was with Priscilla, to suddenly get all those award nominations and to be part of that. I got nominated for every single award during that season, and didn't win any of them, but I wasn't expecting to. But it just to be hanging out with all those people, and then after that to just have all those directors, the Kathleen Marshalls and the Marsha Milgram Dodgers and the Jeff Calhouns and the Chris Catellis and all those people just say, well, come and play with us now in this show, and to feel as though it was where I belonged, and to be made to feel that it was where I belonged. And I think it had a lot to do with the fact that it didn't happen until I was in my 50s, because there was no sort of urgency or feeling of I have to prove myself. It was like, yeah, okay, I've worked my whole life to get here, and now these people don't know me, and they only know me as a character actor. So show them what you can do. I didn't have to live up to anything in the past, and it was a clean slate. So yeah, it was a very thrilling time. I'm very grateful for it.
So it's probably going to be like, choosing your favorite child or whatever. But I'm sure that you are up on the current Broadway season, and and what's interesting about the season. And Tony Awards will be coming up relatively soon. Do you have any favorites going into it, or anything that inspires you?
I have to say that my favorite of last season was Kimberly Akimbo, which I just loved. Of this crop, I haven't heard too much. I've heard bits of Water for Elephants. I haven't heard any of Gatsby. I can't think what else. They all seem to be adaptations of books this season, don't they?
Yeah, well, there's the one with Eden Espinosa as well. The
Limpica.
Limpica? Is that Limpica? Yeah. I actually haven't heard much of the stuff that I can remember, so I don't know. I can't predict yet what the race is going to be.
No worries. But I'm sure that Spencer has opinions, doesn't he, Aaron?
Lots and lots. My favorite time in New York City is nap time. Anyways.
Do you know what I would like to see happen this year? I would love for Daniel Radcliffe and Jonathan Groff and Lindsay Mendez to get a special Tony for the three of them, for Merrily, because I think it's lovely that they've sort of formed this wonderful united front as almost like a single entity in terms of bringing young people into the theatre to see a failed Sondheim show and turning it into a hit, and sort of introducing, I think, a whole new audience to Sondheim in this particular time. I just think the goodwill and the good grace with which they have handled this whole thing, and the joy, and I think it would be lovely, rather than putting them in a competitive category against each other in a season that seems to be pretty strong on performances, that if they did a special Tony for the three of them, I think that would be a nice thing.
Yeah, they could do that.
And that's actually not my idea. It was Tony Taylor who suggested it, and I thought, yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so we're moving along because we are running a little bit over time. I'm very sorry about that. The Australian sound of musicals, in my opinion, doesn't seem to be as identifiable as when you hear a Broadway musical, you know it's a Broadway musical. When you hear a West End British musical, you kind of know it's a British musical. That's without the accent. Do you feel like there needs to be some serious discussion about finding our unique sound for Australian musicals to sell across the world? Because when you look at what has been successes overseas, it's been jukebox musicals.
Absolutely. It's generational. It changes. I thought in the 70s we had found it. It was interesting that it was a sort of a folky. We had a composer named Alan John who wrote a fabulous show called Jonah Jones. And at the same period, well, it wasn't the 70s, it was sort of the 80s. Max Lambert wrote a musical called Darlinghurst Nights. They were sort of almost Sondheimy in their sound, but very Australian. And I thought that was where it was headed, but we now seem to have gone back to a rather generic poppy sound. I mean, I think there's some interesting stuff being written, but none of it's sticking in my head. And this is absolutely no disrespect to the writers who are working in the industry now, but it's, as you say, it's not an identifiable sound. I think the problem with Australian musicals in terms of the workshopping is people just aren't tough enough. And I found this even as far back as the Venetian Twins, when I was doing that, the composers said, oh, all the principal characters have to have their own song. And I was like, well, my song that I've got isn't as good as the songs as the rest of them. Can't we just cut my song? No, because that would leave you without a song. And I said, well, I don't care. I'd rather be without a song than sing a song that's not very good. And that sort of discussion happens in Australian musicals where people just aren't tough enough. And you need a director to actually go, I'm sorry, you've got to kill your darlings. You've got to get rid of the song that you love because it's not serving us, or write something better. And I don't think we have that ethos in Australia. I think it's like, aren't you clever for having written that song? I also, I remember getting pissed off when The Hat Pin was being written, when James Miller, he had a fabulous Act One closer that was really, it was a dialogue scene that was so abrupt and shocking that the audience gasped and there was a blackout. I remember saying that's one of the best first act endings I've ever seen. Then when I saw the show, there was a power ballad there. And I said, why have you done that? Well, we've got to give the leading lady a fabulous song. And I remember being so disappointed because, granted, they might have loved the song, but they lost that fabulous shocker of the Act One thing because it was like, oh, we've got to have a power ballad. I wish there was less, following a blueprint in Australia and just taking more risks and doing something unique of their own, and then maybe we'll have something that will have some longevity. We certainly talked with Priscilla in the workshop. Simon Phillips said we can either commission an Australian score and close in 2 weeks, or we can use the songs from the film and run forever.
Well, that's the sad reality.
Yeah, and I was very unhappy about it being a jukebox score, but, the show would not still be being done nearly 20 years later with an Australian score. We would have disappeared. Look at Muriel's Wedding. They can't, all the tries they're making to get that off the ground. And at one point I heard Rebel Penfold, not Rebel,
Wilson.
What's her name? Rebel? Wilson.
Not Rebel Penfield Russell.
Not Rebel Penfold Russell. Rebel Wilson was attached to it to go to New York. But, it still hasn't got a distinctive personality of its own. Whereas Priscilla, they're up dancing in the aisle. So what do you do? I just think we need to bite the bullet a little more here in Australia and work harder.
Yeah, I think because you can tell Australian rock. You can tell, when it's 70s Australian rock. It's.
So I did want to talk about the producers since we were in the producers together many years ago. And I just remember there were questions about, which role you wanted to audition for and if you would audition for a role. Would you do it again? And would you do anything differently?
At the time, I really wanted to play Max, Bialystock. But that was simply because I didn't want to play the stereotype screaming queen Roger Debris. I just found it offensive, and I was at the time I was fighting stereotypes, and they eventually allowed me to audition for Max, and I don't think my tape even got sent to America. I think they did it to shut me up. And then they asked me 4 times to audition for Roger, and it was Tony Taylor who said, you can't keep saying no. He said, people don't keep asking you to star in a major commercial musical. He said, at least have the courtesy to turn up and read for them. So I turned up for the audition for Roger and got the gig. But I chafed against it the entire year we were doing it. I kept looking for ways to deepen it or to give it another dimension. And you couldn't, because that had killed the joke. The joke was he's a one-dimensional, silly queen, and that's the way you've got to play it. And so No, I didn't find it satisfying. I was very grateful for the profile it gave me at the time, and it was almost like a direct springboard into Priscilla, because I don't think I would have been offered the workshop of Priscilla had I not done Roger. But it wasn't something that I loved. I grew to love it by the time we got to Brisbane, because as you remember, the creatives went home.
Yeah.
And, we'd all been so straitjacketed into the American performances. And it was interesting when I got to New York and met Katie Huffman and people who'd gone into the show as replacements in New York, and they all said, oh, it was exactly the same with us. They said, and that was because so much of it was improvised in rehearsal or was devised in different rooms. Katie would be off with the dance arranger putting together If You Got It Flaunted in one room, and Matthew and Nathan to be in another room. There was no sort of real ownership of the show until after it opened. And then suddenly it was like a panic of, oh, well, this is the only way it works, is to just keep reproducing what we've got, because they were so terrified that it was all just going to fall apart if new people came and joined it. That's why people like Henry Goodman got fired and Richard Dreyfuss got fired. And, it was, they didn't know how it worked. It was like this magic trick. So it was interesting. But yeah, I was offered Roger again in another production in America, and I turned it down because I thought, no, I didn't have a good time. It's time for me to do something else. I had a lot more fun doing Priscilla because Bernadette was a completely rounded character that I could do anything with, and she was mine. And so, yeah, The Producers was of its time for me.
Yep, great.
I know it was some advice you were given early in your career that turned out to be wrong.
Some advice I was given early in my career that turned out to be... I don't think I was given a great deal of advice in my career other than don't be late for rehearsals. And because I used to sleep in a lot as a teenager, because, I used to burn the midnight oil. And so I used to rock in late. And somebody, Frank Wilson, the actor, shook his finger at me and said, this is going to do terrible damage to your career. If you keep up like this, you're going to get a really bad reputation. And so that was really the only advice I was ever given. I was sort of pretty much left to my own devices after that. And I never had a career plan. It was always like people always had a different idea of me than I had of myself. So suddenly the phone would ring and it'd be the Melbourne Theatre Company saying, come and star in Private Lives by Noel Coward. And I'd say, me? Why don't you get Hugo Weaving? I was always casting other people's shows. I was always suggesting other people. I was always surprised when people, come and play the baker in Into the Woods for the Sydney Theatre Company. Me? Why? So it was lovely. I just went where the wind blew me, and it ended up giving me this sort of wonderful rounded resume, because I got to do everything from Shakespeare to Sondheim and, Eugene O'Neill and Australian stuff. It was very, very exciting. I don't think I would change anything.
Some advice I was given on early when I moved to Australia by a particular agent who will remain nameless was, you need to go back into the closet. Don't talk about your sexuality in Australia in early 2000s. And I do look up to you, Tony, as someone, from the community who has spoken his truth through his characters and just through the way that you live your life. Aaron talked to Peppermint about this on a previous episode, whether they consider themselves an artist or a trans artist. For you, do you prefer to be known as an artist or as a gay artist, or is that something that's important to you?
It came and went at different points in my career. It was like when I was starting out, I didn't want to be known as Tony Lamont's son and Helen Reddy's nephew,
Oh, sorry to bring it up. Sorry.
Well, no, I'm talking about when I was 17, when I was starting out, because, you're trying to create an identity for yourself, because you don't know who you are when you're starting out in the business, and you don't know your place in the business. So labels frighten you unless you're a radical or, you want to stand for something very early in your career. I just wanted to work in as many styles as I possibly could. So my early roles were gay roles. Nobody else was playing them when I was 17. So, A Hard God, Spoiled, back to back as gay teenagers. Catherine Brisbane, who was the critic for The Australian at the time, said, I think you should now start doing other things. So I went, oh, well, okay. But as I say, I couldn't control what I was being offered. If the role was good and it was a gay role, I took it. If it was a gay role just for the sake of being a gay role, I would say no. Somebody else can do that. But if it was something that I thought I could get my teeth into, this is why I didn't want to play Roger Debris, because I sort of felt anybody else could have done it. But then I realized, well, I've never done a big tap role before. And, Warren Carlyle, the choreographer, said to me, I'm teaching you the Leroy Reams version and not the Gary Beach version. And I went, what do you mean? He said, there's more tapping. And so suddenly I thought, oh, well, this is what I'm expanding my skill set here. So I never saw myself as a gay actor, but I'm not ashamed of it. And it's a label if people want to give me as, if I'm inspiring somebody like you, Matt, that is thrilling and so flattering. I'm honoured, but certainly nothing I've ever hidden. It's just, it may have informed my work. I like to think gay actors have a lot to bring to the table.
Thank you.
You have inspired me looking through all these 150 titles on your resume. You inspired me to nap. Sorry. So mean. Thank you so much, Tony.
Thank you for having me.
I can't begin to say what a joy doing this show is, listening to your stories and reuniting you guys on my show and all that jazz. So I didn't know, Matt didn't tell me that, because I didn't know that you were in the producers. I didn't see it, but I know a lot of your other career. And it wasn't until I was researching, and Matt requested to be on this episode out of the 3 co-hosts. He's like, I'm a big fan of Tony. And I'm like, okay, sure. He didn't mention that he was you were in the producers together. And so
exactly, yes.
3 days ago that I realized, and I'm like, oh, awesome.
Oh, you've had so many of my friends and co-workers on. I was going through the list. Anastasia Barzee, who I did Victor Victoria with, Manol Felciano, we did Amelie together. Andrew Keenan Bolger, we did Ever After together. Chris Gattelli, I did Pageant with. F. Michael Haney, I did Ever After with. And Charles, of course, who wrote plays for me in New York, Charles Bush.
Yeah.
So, so it's been lovely going back and listening to bits and pieces of the interviews. It's been good fun.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you for listening. I promise I haven't been stalking you, Tony. I promise I haven't been stalking you. Just artists that, whose work inspire me and inspired Matt or my other co-hosts and, people that we want to celebrate.
Well, I'm very flattered that you asked.
Alison mentioned she was our very first guest, and she said, you've got to invite Tony Sheldon on.
I'm astonished.
To be honest, I didn't think you would say yes. So I sort of thought, okay, well, I do need to at least build up my list a bit and, at least show that I'm capable and we're a legitimate show. And you said yes, so thank you so much. Before we let you go, where can people find you on the social medias?
I am on Instagram as Aldonza Mudd, Mudd.
Is that like a drag name or something? What's?
It was a character that Tony Taylor created when we first met during the 70s. That she was Aldonza Mudd and her caravan d'Amour. She was like a traveling gypsy hooker.
Oh, wonderful!
And she would drag her caravan through Glebe and parts of Leichhardt, and sort of throw it open and offer her sexual services. And I once tried to write a musical about Aldonza Mudd. There was going to be one woman and 5 men, and all of their recollections of this wonderful woman. And so it's just one of those names that I've always loved and wanted to keep alive in some small way on my Instagram.
Oh, I'm so glad I threw that in there. I'm so glad I threw that in. And she sounds like my type of lady. Anyways, we've kept you a little bit over time. I'm so sorry.
That's perfectly all right.
It's been an absolute honor. And Alison says hello and says you are absolutely top drawer because that's where you keep all the good stuff.
Oh, it is absolutely. Oh, please give her my love when you speak to her.
Yes, I will do.
Thank you.
So thank you so much.
So great to see you, Tony.
You too, Matt. See you, baby. And love
Thanks,
from
and love to Tony T from me.
Yeah, and TT sends all his love.